The 15th of August, 2020, 2:28 in the afternoon, Northern California, the Loyalton area, near Sierra Valley, Chilkoot, and the empty crossroads of Hallelujah Junction. For an ordinary person, this was a place where the road runs through dry grass. Ranches stand far apart, and the horizon seems too wide for anything sudden to happen on it. Someone was driving a pickup along the highway. Someone was trying to reach relatives by phone. Someone was looking at the column of smoke and thinking only one thing: as long as the wind does not turn toward the house. Wildfires in California had already become a terrifying habit, but that day the habit began to break. The smoke was not just rising, it was building. It was growing upward like a living tower, darkening below, whitening above, and pulling air into itself with such force as if the fire had begun to breathe with the lungs of a storm. And in the National Weather Service office in Reno, something appeared on radar that should not have been there: rotation inside the fire. A day before that, everything looked almost like another line in a fire report. On the 14th of August, lightning struck a dry area east of Loyalton, near Mount Ina-Coolbrith. Grass, brush, and forested sections caught fire. The terrain was difficult, the roads were sparse, the air was hot, the fuel dried almost to the limit. Firefighters knew this set of conditions too well. Low humidity, gusty wind, terrain that helps flames accelerate. But the real danger was not only on the ground. Above the fire lay an unstable atmosphere, the kind where hot air does not simply rise but forces its way higher and higher. The flame became an engine. The smoke became fuel for a cloud. Sparks, ash, water vapor, and overheated air moved upward until an ordinary smoke column began turning into something that resembled a thunderstorm. Not a thunderstorm above a fire. A thunderstorm born from the fire itself. In moments like these, a disaster changes category. A wildfire stops being only a line of flame that can be bypassed, surrounded, soaked with water, or stopped with a bulldozer line. It begins to create its own weather. Above Loyalton, a pyrocumulonimbus was forming, a fire-born thundercloud capable of producing powerful downdrafts, lightning, sudden winds, and even tornadoes. On the ground, it looked like an apocalyptic wall. At its base, orange smoke, coal-black haze, and flame above, a white anvil, almost like that of a summer thunderstorm. But inside that beauty was a trap. In an ordinary thunderstorm, rotation comes from the atmosphere. Here, the fire was lifting it. Hot air was tearing upward, cold currents were dropping down, the wind was changing with height, and the entire column of smoke began to twist. For a meteorologist, this was no longer just a bad fire day. It was the moment when radar was saying, a tornado is being born inside the smoke. At 2:35 in the afternoon, the National Weather Service in Reno took a step that sounded almost impossible. That is why the phrase "in 12 minutes" sounds here not like a pretty exaggeration, but like a sense of scale. Only a short time earlier, there had been a smoke column on the horizon, and now an official bulletin was talking about a tornado. A tornado warning was issued, not for an ordinary thunderstorm, but for the pyrocumulonimbus over the Loyalton Fire. The text said that the fire cloud was capable of producing a fire-induced tornado and downdraft winds above 60 miles per hour. For residents, it was a strange combination of words. For firefighters, it was an order to treat the sky as a direct threat. Because with that kind of wind, fire does not simply move forward, it jumps. It throws burning branches beyond the defensive line. It knocks down trees. It turns smoke in such a way that visibility disappears within seconds. And the most frightening thing was that the storm barely moved. It stood over the fire area like a huge machine feeding itself. The fire lifted the air strengthened the cloud sent wind back into the fire. The first traces would later be found in Roberts Canyon. There, where there were no television cameras and no city blocks, the tornado still left its signature. Jeffrey pines were snapped and uprooted. A narrow strip of damage passed through the forest, as if an invisible hand had dragged a giant hook across the slope. It was an EF1, but the ordinary category sounds deceptively calm here. Because this was not a tornado over a green field beneath a grey storm base. This was a rotating vortex inside a burning landscape, beneath a cloud born from heat, smoke, and ash. It was anticyclonic, rotating differently from the way classic tornadoes in the northern hemisphere most often rotate. Even the direction seemed wrong. The fire seemed to be breaking the rules meteorologists were used to. And if someone had been standing closer to that damage path, they would have heard not only the roar of the wind, but also the cracking of trees, the rustle of ash across the ground, and the dull impact of trunks falling into the smoke. But the main turn was something else. It turned out to be not one vortex. The fire did not simply twist the air by accident for a few seconds and disappear. It continued producing rotation. After some time, a second confirmed EF1 appeared. Then another tornado, longer, wider, filmed by witnesses near California, Route 70 and US 395 in the Hallelujah Junction area. It moved beneath the base of the pyrocumulonimbus like a dark pendant under a smoke-borne thunderstorm. It could not honestly be rated on the EF scale because it passed through burned sagebrush terrain where there was almost nothing to show the strength of the wind. And that makes the story even more disturbing. Sometimes a disaster seems weak only because it did not encounter a house. Not because it was not dangerous, not because people were safe. There was simply almost nothing to destroy. If that same structure had shifted by several kilometers, that day could have ended with very different numbers. For firefighters, this was one of the hardest situations imaginable. When a forest is burning, the enemy is usually in front of you. When a fire creates a thunderstorm, the enemy appears above, from the flank, and behind your back all at once. Planes and helicopters cannot work calmly near such updrafts. Radio communication becomes overloaded. Roads are closed. Smoke hides the terrain. People on the ground receive a warning that sounds almost absurd. Take shelter from a tornado, but you are surrounded by a fire zone. A driver on the highway sees not an ordinary wall of smoke, but a rotating column that changes shape every second. A ranch resident thinks not about scientific terms, but about gates, horses, documents, the oxygen tank of an elderly relative, a phone that is already running out of battery. In moments like these, survival is not made of heroic speeches. It is made of fast decisions. Turn now or in a minute. Take the animals or save yourself. Wait for an order or leave while the road is still visible. And yet the most important thing in this story is that the number of deaths from these tornadoes was 0. That does not make the event small, it makes it a warning. Because 0 here was not proof of safety, but the result of geography, luck, early action, and the fact that the vortices passed mostly through sparsely populated terrain. The Loyalton Fire ultimately burned 47,029 acres, more than 70 square miles, an area larger than several major urban districts combined. Structures were destroyed, people left their homes, the air became unhealthy, and a charred scar remained on the maps. But in national memory, this episode did not take its place beside the best-known disasters. There was no huge number of victims. There was no recognizable image of a destroyed city center. There was something quieter and perhaps more unsettling. Proof that a fire can cross the boundary between the elements. After Loyalton, official reports sounded dry. Abnormally low fuel moisture, an unstable atmosphere, 2 powerful pyrocumulonimbus clouds, 3 tornadoes, radar rotation, damaged trees, 0 deaths. But behind that dryness hides a new reality. We are used to thinking that disasters exist separately. Fire is the ground, a thunderstorm is the sky, a tornado is the Great Plains, smoke is an aftermath. On the 15th of August, 2020 in California, everything blended together. Fire became the engine of the atmosphere. Smoke became a cloud. The cloud became a storm. The storm began to rotate. And then a tornado descended from it. Not a metaphor, not a legend, not a shot from a disaster movie. A real meteorological object that appeared where a person usually expects only flame. This is the main lesson of Loyalton. The most dangerous disaster is not always the loudest one. Sometimes it happens in an empty valley, between highways, ranches, and power lines, and on a map it looks like just another fire perimeter. But inside that perimeter, nature is testing a new combination of forces. Heat, drought, wind, smoke, unstable air. And suddenly the familiar rules stop working. A firefighter looks not only at the fire front, but also at the base of the cloud. A meteorologist watches not only the thunderstorm, but also the smoke column. A resident of a small town understands that a tornado warning may come not because of a cloud on the horizon, but because of a fire beyond the hill. That day, the sky over Northern California did not simply darken. It caught fire, rose upward, began to spin, and for several terrifying minutes showed a future for which people were almost not ready.